you talk about the 3 C's, and you've spoken about the co-agitation, but I'd love for you to share those 3 C's again and what they mean to you, because I think for our viewers, we'll be able to see the link in terms of, our campaign around human rights.
Yeah, so Rosa Rebellion was really birthed out of a need that myself and my co-founder, Megan Harding, saw, which is in our daily life and our professional life, we were constantly kind of oscillating between sort of the space that I think around the world we define as a traditional activist, or someone who's more on the front lines, who's more grassroots, and folks who were doing advocacy and activism in other spaces, right? And I believe storytelling is a form of activism. It can be a form of activism. And so, yeah, we created Rosa Rebellion to be a platform for creative activism by and for women of color, because we didn't see a space that was nurturing that. And in that work, what we have developed is sort of a pedagogy around how that can take place and exist, not just for Black women, but for women of color as a whole, but also the dynamic amongst those very nuanced experiences, right? My experience as a Black woman in America is very different from a woman of Asian descent in Australia, right? Or in America. And so the opportunity we had around, again, so I talked about sort of the shift from allyship to co-agitation, and really as a way to create a more visual representation of this work. Not to say that those words can't be used interchangeably, but again, that agitation to me demonstrates like being an irritant, like being subversive in these systems that would just perform in the way they were intended to, which was not to benefit you or me. So in order to reconcile that, we have to be agitators. We have to be an irritant in the system. The other word that we use a lot is co-labor, which is that that's really kind of birthed out of the work that I do in community engagement. And something I really admired and learned a lot about actually in my trip to Western Australia a few years ago, and particularly in engagement with the Indigenous community there, with the Aboriginal community there, which is that you can't just come into communities, particularly ones that have historically been marginalized, and just expect to show up and be welcomed. And right, and so part of that work is to co-labor with them, that this is a collaborative effort. So how do you walk alongside a community, right, as an institution, as an organization, as a individual of privilege, that has to be something that you're willing to do, which is walk alongside, not co-opt the voices of that community, not take over that community, but willing to be a collaborator, a co-laborer. And part of that work is understanding the stories of that community. That's been the biggest thing I think that's come out of this moment, right? Is I think in the past 2 weeks, I've probably gotten 100 direct messages on Instagram and emails and text messages from particularly white women who have kind of awakened in this moment, and they're trying to figure out what their role is, right? And in that, while that is so wonderful, right, that we are beginning to expose individuals to the work that's to be done collectively, is that there's some work that has to be done individually, that we can't burden communities of color, we can't burden individuals of color. So that might be people on the board at the museum, that might be the community members, where we can't burden them to use their voices as a way to support our mission and vision. What's the work that we have to do as an organization to hold ourselves accountable and understand the power we have around impact? And so, what education are we investing in so that we understand the opportunity we have to dismantle these systems of oppression? And so I think that's the work of co-laboring, is doing the work on your own, right? Not tasking communities of color or vulnerable communities to do that work for you, to be the educators for you, particularly if you are not financially investing in those communities and in terms of creating a dynamic of reciprocity. And the third C that we use is around a part of our mission, which is creative activism, which really is just encouraging and inspiring, in our case, women of color, but I think this is correct across the board, is that I think it was Ava DuVernay, who is a director, a very well-known international director. She did Selma, she did
When They See Us, Queen Sugar.
Queen Sugar, all of those amazing pieces of art, right? Greenleaf, yes, go on and on. Yes, you know.
I'm like a fan, as you can tell, you know.
And she said, maybe earlier this year, she had a quote. She was being awarded with something, and she said, I believe art and activism to be made up of the same fabric because they both require imagination and innovation. Right? And I think oftentimes we think of activism or justice work as this thing that happens in the nonprofit space, this thing that happens with, you know, folks that are just really passionate. And it's like, no, we have such an amazing opportunity to be innovative. We have such an amazing opportunity to be creative with the ways in which we disrupt, with the ways in which we hold institutions accountable. So what wonderful opportunities do you have as a museum? Do organizations, do companies, do corporate spaces have to leverage their resources, to partner with activists, to partner with artists, to bring about a shift and to bring about change? And so we really try to empower this idea around creative activism, that there's not one formula or format to it, and we won't get anywhere unless we're all willing to adapt a little bit around the language and work of agitation and activism.
What message would you say to our supporters?
Yeah, I would just really encourage folks to prepare themselves for a paradigm shift, right? To understand that this is truly around how we value humans, how we value our neighbors, how we value our coworkers, how we value institutions, and that it's truly going to require some work on our part as individuals and as institutions.
Right.
So what stories have we ignored? What stories have we silenced? What stories don't we know that could serve us in being better equipped to participate in this conversation and this labor? And that realizing that Black Lives Matter is not some political, demand, that it's about the, not just quality of life, but the preservation of life. And that we need to all be a part of that we all need to be co-laborers, we all need to be co-agitators in that work. And what a wonderful opportunity that is, that we can all participate. And so I would encourage everyone to it can be very overwhelming, right? Particularly in this moment, to think, well, how do I change the criminal justice system in my community? How do I change education? How do I rectify however 100 many years of history? But identify one thing that you can do today and this week, right? Maybe it's reading a book around racial justice, or the ways in which that has taken place around the world, or right there in Australia. And I'd be happy to share some book recommendations with the museum, with Fadzi. Maybe it's partnering with an organization where you get to leverage your platform, turn your platform over so that they can be amplified. Take that one step this week, right? And then use that as a building block about how you can be revolutionary in this work.
Thank you so much, Virginia. Absolute love to you. Thank you for the time.